Well, good afternoon or good morning for those of you in the Americas, and thanks for joining us for this Netbiscuits webinar. And it's great to be part of BrightTalk's 2015 Digital Marketing Analytics Summit. My name's Duncan Clark, and I'm Head of Global Research here at Netbiscuits. Those of you who joined us on our webinar a couple of weeks ago will recall how we explored how the combination of mobile, or more precisely, the multi-screen and the social world is dramatically changing marketing. It puts the consumer firmly at the center of the digital universe. So in this webinar, we wanted to take a more specific look at some examples of how content marketing performance can be optimized in a multi-screen world. So first of all then, I wanted to take a quick look at the agenda for the next 45 minutes or so. So I'd like to begin with what will emerge as the most important aspect, and that's the consumer and how digital trends are changing the way in which consumers are acting and behaving, and consider what this means for marketers. In the second section, we'll look at what the multi-screen environment means for content marketing, and in particular, how it changes the marketing funnel as we currently perceive it today, turning it into a reverse funnel, and especially because it means that we can bring customer engagement much more into focus. And then in the third section, we will drill down into how we can measure customer engagement. How can we do that if we want to determine the actual success of content marketing campaigns? And then we'll close the session with any questions and answers. So first of all, I want to take a look at the multi-screen social phenomenon. 2015 is already turning out to be another exciting, if not challenging, year for marketers. Two major consumer trends around mobile devices and social engagement are turning the traditional marketing funnel upside down. But before we look at that, in this first section, we're going to explore how all of this is coming about, and also, critically, how rapidly the consumer landscape is changing. So the stampede towards mobile, in combination with the lure of social media and sharing, has created the perfect storm for the rise in content marketing. So valuable content requires establishing engaged audiences. Meanwhile, consumers will continue to regard traditional advertising and marketing tactics as intrusive. So these will become increasingly ineffective and less valuable. So this means a decrease in the need for traditional brand, product, and price advertising. Now the change is happening quickly. Last year, for instance, mobile web viewing matched or surpassed desktop for the first time on many sites, and simultaneously, social platforms like Facebook and Twitter started driving serious competition for Google advertising revenue. Now, the social link has reawakened the pursuit of greater personalization, always something of a holy grail in marketing. And of course, with this in mind, targeted ads based on consumer preferences seem to be the next logical step for marketers who we've all done it, eagerly placing digital ads on social sites and measuring that success against attributes such as views, likes, or shares. Yet the return on investment from such activities is not something that happens overnight, and for many, it can be difficult to demonstrate at all. So consumers, having been overwhelmed by ads, they're already showing signs of advertising fatigue, and their apathy is heightened by things like privacy fears and media-driven stories that Big Brother is watching. So it's interesting then, I think, that the answer to these changing trends, as it turns out, is something that we've been doing for many years. Content marketing, as we know, has been around since the 90s, and also, as you'd expect, marketers are masters at creating good content. And we see this borne out in surveys as well. So in this survey, pictured in the top left here by Smart Insights, content marketing has been identified as the most commercially important digital trend for 2015, almost double the amount of marketers identifying that as the top trend ahead of big data. And a similar story as well, when we look at the information from Google Trends, the line chart here showing the growth of interest in the term content marketing, and that's something very telling indeed. But the rise of the multi-screen generation, fueled by mobile, has given content new wings to be everything to every user and at any time. But it needs an engine to really make it work. And I think it's here that the personalization piece becomes much more interesting, rather than simply thinking of personalization in the sense of targeted ads. And I think there's another reason behind content marketing's appeal to marketers. If you can tap into the multi-screen social phenomenon around content sharing, you're enabling the consumer to do the hard work for your brand. So start with a few people, develop highly valuable content, and watch engagement and traffic grow like wildfire. So the buzz term is content marketing, but we've been doing it in other forms for many years. It's that distribution mechanism that's changing. And as a marketing conversion strategy, it's rapidly growing in importance over the traditional search marketing and digital advertising that the internet was built upon. And I think this shift underpins why we think it validates the view of the reverse funnel, which we'll explore in the next section here. So it's the content meets multiscreen. So in this section, I wanted to highlight why, when we fuse these two trends together, it creates that reverse tunnel that I was talking about. I then want to think about what this means in terms of planning how to get the content strategy piece right. And I'll also, in this section, present some findings on what marketers are prioritizing, and also give you some of my views on whether this makes sense. So, as a starting point, I wanted to highlight what marketers have identified as their top goals for 2015. And we can see on this slide here, in joint first position, as agreed by marketers in this B2C content marketing survey, alongside that customer loyalty piece, is customer engagement at 88%. And that's followed very closely by brand awareness at 87%. And for marketers, it's much ahead of sales, which would be next in line, which comes in at 77%. And this makes sense. In terms of these top three, if we get the loyalty, the engagement, and the awareness pieces right, it follows that sales should follow on anyway. So the conclusion is that marketers' top goals for 2015 focus less on lead generation and selling, and much more on engagement and developing those long-term relationships with audiences and customers. But these do feel to me like areas that are less definable in terms of how they can be measured. But I think certainly when we look at these three on the screen here, in the area of engagement, there are very definite outcomes that can be measured, and I hope to show some of those to you as we move through the presentation. So now we know the objectives, I want to consider how could we go about achieving these goals by getting content marketing right. If we look at these in turn should help us define as well what sort of things we should be measuring. And I think it requires getting three important things right from the outset. And what you'll notice here is every single one of these considerations starts with the customer, not with marketing metrics or goals. Okay, so first up, number one, you need to understand your potential customers' preferences. What do they like and what are they sharing? So targeting visitor personas is a critical part of deciding what content is considered valuable enough to engage with and share. If you don't know the audience, then you can't build the content for them. Second, you have to engage your potential customers wherever they are. And don't forget, this new consumer is a multi-screen fanatic. So that means building content that works on any device at any time of the day. So good content counts for nothing if the user can't or won't engage with it. And then the final piece here, you need to measure and optimize all of those content pieces on a continual basis. So if it's not working as part of this feedback loop, then it will be difficult to ensure that the audience base, both the established audience and the new as your audience grows, can go from strength to strength as an advocate for your brand. Bearing sort of brand advocates in mind, I think that's what becomes really important when we start to look at what content marketing does to the marketing funnel. So before we go into the reverse funnel, here on the left-hand side is the funnel that we're used to. So we're very familiar with the many to few paradigm. However, when we think more about content marketing, we've got a situation that looks much more like it does here on the right-hand side. So first of all, we must create content that we already know journalists, bloggers, and of course consumers are looking to share from the outset. What we're effectively doing is catering for a smaller but far more engaged audience of brand advocates at the top. So it has to be the right content. It's no good just producing white papers on topics that your company finds interesting. There has to be that dual interest, both for you as a company and for your audience as well. Now, if the targeted audience finds that the content engaging, they will share it to their networks. And of course, being the trusted advisors that they are to their audiences, some of their audience will then share that further. So within this sort of structure, the task is to secure that ongoing engagement with that audience, understanding the level of their engagement, and also whether that's changing over time. Those two pieces are absolutely key to understanding what makes them share content with their social networks, to ultimately then draw more traffic to your site or sites. And for this to work, and to work well, it requires the use of analytics that specialize in content user experience, multi-screen capability, and user context across key engagement metrics. So I wanted to have a quick look at a survey that was published on the CMI website recently, and I think this illustrates very clearly where we're at in the market at the moment. As we mentioned, content marketing is on the rise across the board, which means that the practical concerns relating to the actual production of content are quite understandably at the top of the list here. We see producing engaging content as the top concern with 58%. Next is producing it consistently at 53%. And then making sure there's enough variety in the content, that comes in third position with 45% here. So I think this shows that marketers are already well underway with their content marketing programs, and also that many of them have come far enough to realize that far from being the straightforward walk in the park that we'd like it to be, it's actually very tough to pull off effectively. I think it's also intriguing that producing engaging content is the top one here, and I think it's partly because we're not yet sophisticated in measuring that user experience piece. So we may often miss things perhaps that our audience would find engaging, and sometimes we don't know which topics that they would find or they would not find engaging in each instance. And actually, I think it's so annoyingly easy to fall into the trap of producing content that we want to produce, rather than thinking first up, what is it that the audience wants to engage with and share. So measuring effectiveness of content, that's identified here by 40% as a challenge. And I think that's small wonder, given that it does take us a little bit outside of the remit of the established metrics that we've become accustomed to. But I do think that in the same way that marketers need to demonstrate the ROI of their traditional web campaign tactics, the same requirement will be driven by the rise of content marketing, especially given how much we're looking to spend in this area. I also think it's a challenge that can be overcome. One final point on this slide, I think it's interesting that those technology-related challenges is right at the bottom of the list here. But I think it's remembering, in light of that if an audience can't access your content, then it's also wasted resource. So although it comes at the bottom here, that is very much a consideration that we have to think about in terms of the distribution of content. So one of the reasons I'm really optimistic about the actual ability to measure the effectiveness of the user experience is because of the impressive data footprint that digital content leaves behind. On this chart, you'll see that I've highlighted in purple the activities that content marketers say they're focusing on for 2015. So the purple indicating the sheer array, actually, of all of the digital content options. So what we've got here is lots of media that will divulge a lot of information about users' engagement. One that I would like to specifically pick on within this list here is video. Now that comes in at 76%, and I would say that perhaps this should be higher given some of the trends that we're seeing in places, particularly where connectivity is improving. Videos are absolutely great for captivating an audience, keeping people on sites for longer, and also they're great for sharing. So it doesn't hurt for content marketers to be ahead of the video trend. Another one I wanted to pick out, actually, if we scan further down the list, you'll see that I've highlighted mobile content in deep purple here, as I think there's also great opportunity for marketers to be able to outpace their competitors when we think about what that means, or indeed how marketers who are responding to this survey have interpreted this option. In actual fact, I think it could be argued that in fact mobile content shouldn't be a separate consideration at all. For instance, if you're creating, what's the point of creating, writing social media content, publishing articles, publishing white papers, producing infographics and webinars, and so on and so forth, if they can't be consumed and shared via mobile devices? So I think it's a little bit strange to think of it as a separate tick list item here, unless something more specific is being implied. Anyhow, the great thing about all of this digital content is that it enables us to measure the user experience with a much higher degree of accuracy. We can see specifically if, when, and how people are interacting with different content items, different content pieces. And this gives us very strong indicators about what is and what is not working. And by applying engagement metrics to business objectives, we can also make more informed decisions about how to spend our content marketing budgets, also how to maximize return on investment on any content that we do produce. And I think this is really important, especially when we look at this next figure, given that spending on content marketing is skyrocketing. $135 billion was the estimated spend on new content marketing collateral in 2014. So with this kind of outlay, I think it's absolutely vital that we can maximize the return on every single piece of content that we produce. And in fact, in a CMI study, 86% of B2B marketers said that they do use content marketing, but only 38% believe that they're good at it. So in order to get better at this piece, I think the first step on the road to fixing this problem is to measure the user experience. And I think this is an aspect that is quite often overlooked. Of course, we're used to thinking about measuring the performance of creative, so things like how many views, how many downloads, how many video plays, for instance. We're also used to measuring the performance of distribution channels. Here I'm thinking about things like total number of shares on social media, how many clicks for PPC, and so on and so forth. We're also increasingly taking into account the performance according to personas or segmentations. So here things like the impact of demographics on the success or failure of a specific content marketing campaign. However, measuring that user experience and measuring the actual level of engagement is something that can quite often get ignored. And that's something I wanted to look at in the third section of the webinar. So let's take a look at this piece in more detail. In terms of gauging the user experience, we actually need a systematic approach to measurement. And so here are some of my views on what I think should be taken into account in terms of the user experience and some of the reasons why we should be looking at those aspects. So measuring the user experience, I think it needs to take into account three main areas, all of which impact engagement. First of all, the device or the devices chosen as part of the multi-screen journey. So we know that the physical screen sizes of devices change a user's expectations of the experience on that device. The second piece here, how the visitor's situation or context impacts their willingness to engage. So things like, are they on the move, are they in the office, are they at home? And then finally, how is content actually performing? So when visitors reach your content, how long do they spend with it? How long do they spend watching a video? Do they move on to other videos? How much of an article do they read? Do shorter articles get read to completion more often? So those types of questions. So while we can't get the experience absolutely right every single time for every single person, by using these indicators, we can plan and distribute content that is more suited to our visitors far more of the time. And for our visitors, it's going to feel like an experience that's much more relevant, that's much more personalized, and we stand a much better chance of reaping the rewards from all of that great content that we've created. So just looking at the first point here about the devices, this is the point around how the device impacts that user experience. The user experience is intrinsically linked to the device type or the screen being used. So these cannot be in any way separated. We conducted a report at Netbiscuits in the second half of last year, in which we asked 6,000 consumers from 6 countries across the world how they found their experiences with content on the mobile web. Now, 95% said that they have found content that is not optimized for the device that they're using, and that's staggeringly high. Now, these visitors may not necessarily assume that the problem is simply due to their not using the right platform for the specific content piece. And what these visitors do quite often is simply bounce and leave the site. They certainly won't share the content with friends, family, social media peers, and so on and so forth. So if we think back to that slide with the reverse funnel, with the distribution section, that can hit our potential distribution quite hard. Now, in terms of the multi-screen piece, I think this is where it becomes really important to start thinking about visitor flows and also how these compare from platform to platform, and also how that piece would impact the engagement with content. So I took some very top level measurements from across the Netbiscuits platform, But I think even in these top-level figures, we can see some very revealing trends. For example, I found that there were on average 55% more page views per session on tablets versus smartphone. So when we're thinking about designing things like the user journey, we know already that if content is 3 pages away, then tablet visitors, they're already far more likely to get to that content when we compare that to smartphone users, just because of the platform that they're using. So I think knowing how your visitors behave with statistics like these will totally influence where you want to place content on your site or what the user journey to that content should look like. I also think that this is a good metric, it's a good overall metric to use over time to see if visitors are engaging with more pages as you create content. The hypothesis here being, if you're creating more and more relevant content, it should follow that visitors visit more of these content pages to see this output that we're creating. And this would be one sort of very top-level way of checking that the overall content marketing strategy is functioning as we'd like. Another way might be to think about whether the length of time per session is increasing on your site. So over time, as the content marketing strategy matures, it should also follow that visitors spend longer either on the site as a whole or indeed, of course, on those specific pages where content lives. But this, again, also varies by platform. And I had a quick dive into the data in the Netbiscuits database and found that sessions on tablets were on average 75% longer than sessions on smartphones. So if we're thinking about questions, for example, like which is better, long-form content or short-form content, and especially, we're in an environment at the moment where so many people saying there is that drive back towards the longer-form content, it should be remembered that the performance of these different types of content may not simply be because customers are becoming more engaged. That type of metric could mean that more traffic is coming from tablets where that longer-form content has the chance to perform better. So it wouldn't directly follow that long-form content is right overall, and it doesn't mean necessarily that it's right for all platforms. With that in mind, you could find that while you're making the experience better on one platform, you're inadvertently making it worse on another. So I think the key thing here is it's best to know your own audience and how they're reacting to different content in different scenarios. And then talking of different scenarios leads me into the second point of this section, the impact of context on behavior. So context can be used to measure and target experiences. And I think targeting is an absolute must-have for building the customer relationship. I was reading a blog recently by Matthew Sweezy, Head of Thought Leadership at Pardot, and I thought I'd share one of his observations. In his blog, he says, 2014 was easily the peak of content marketing's rise to the forefront of your marketing programs, but it will not stay in the forefront without adaptations and a more tactical execution. It's become table stakes to just have content, and only those who truly understand how to use content to maximize the overall customer and prospect experience will be able to continue to scale content marketing's effectiveness into 2015. Now, I totally agree with that viewpoint, and I think when we start to think about how to maximize the overall customer experience in order to become more effective at this, Forrester really nail it when they say a mobile moment is a point in time and space when somebody pulls out a mobile device to get what he or she wants immediately in context. So I wanted to have a look now at what does this mean specifically for the content marketing piece. So I had another look at some of the statistics on the Netbiscuits platform, and again, of course, this will vary from site to site, and a top-level view is no replacement for knowing your own traffic, but I did find it interesting how the level of engagement changed so dramatically throughout an average day. And one of the things that I noticed was that on both weekdays and weekends, 7 to 8 p.m. was the time at which people would spend longer viewing content material than compared to any other hour during the day. Now, you may find in your own traffic patterns that actually, for instance, if you're selling B2B and have a bigger work audience, it might be that 12 to 2 will be when your visitors are best engaged. The point is knowing when is the optimum time for holding people's attention, and that's a key part towards ensuring that you give your content the best possible chance to reach an engaged audience. And I think when you sort of dive into the actual measurement of content pieces, content items, it will alter what content items you drive people towards and when. Another of the factors that comes to mind is bandwidth, and this is particularly pertinent at the moment in light of MWC. There was lots of announcements about 5G technology at this year's Mobile World Congress. And as the Chief Executive of Korea Telecom pointed out, already high-speed mobile networks have resulted in people watching 14 times more video content. So one thing that we know is that the increased availability of faster networks is resulting in a higher level of engagement with video content. However, there's a bit of a warning behind that, because if rich media is the only way for customers to engage, then we could be alienating a lot of people. And indeed, the feet on the street view about the experience of content on the mobile web is revealing. A full 96% of visitors say that they often visit sites on mobile devices that are too slow for them to be able to achieve what they were hoping to do. So I think this shows that there's no blanket rule to say you need more video content, or you need more long-form content, or you need more high-res pictures and so on. The right content will depend on your specific audience and how they react and engage with the content you're serving them, based on the device and the context, all of which forming part of the overall larger customer experience, user experience piece. So just to reiterate, content must be relevant to the device and context, or if we were to put it another way, content cannot be separated from the user experience, which is connected to the screen and where that screen is, the bandwidth that the customer has, and the time of day that somebody is visiting. So if we pull all of these items together, here's a 4-point plan that will help improve web traffic and customer engagement with those content marketing campaigns across any screen. Now, number one is tracking the highest performing referrer content. So here we're thinking about questions such as, where is the traffic coming from? Does the traffic actually engage with my content? Is the referral link relevant to this content? And does that referral traffic, which is engaging in content, then enter the funnel? And that can help to answer key questions such as, where does my most engaged audience come from? It may be that Twitter drives most traffic to a website, but actually the conversions come from Facebook. It may prompt a marketer to change ad spend priorities depending on the quality of the inbound traffic rather than just volume. Marketers should investigate what referrer content is driving the highest traffic from social properties, advertising campaigns, and organic search, and then quickly understand which multi-screen user patterns are driving good or bad engagement metrics from inbound and on-site content. So content marketing often, it leads to having to link to websites across multiple social networks, and then that content has to be adjusted for a vast number of devices. Number two here is to measure conversion goals on web content. So things like, if it's a video, do people actually watch the video? For articles, do they scroll down to read the content? And if so, how far do they scroll? So I don't want to be paying a group of content marketers to produce lots of long articles if none of my audience is actually reading more than half. I'd rather direct that resource elsewhere. Also, considerations such as, does the content appear properly when we think about that multi-screen environment? Number three on the list is about planning the right content for the right audience. So if we get that audience segmentation piece right, then this will feed into growing that engaged audience, effectively increasing our distribution layer through market influencers, social media, and of course consumers as well. And then an equally important part of measuring the overall user experience, identifying reasons for bounce. So we have to take into account all the same things that did go right and apply that to when things didn't quite go to plan. So I think identifying reasons for bounce is an absolutely essential part of that continual optimization process. And it's actually really worth doing when we look at the impact of a negative interaction versus a positive, which is what I've got on this slide here. Just to go through the figures, 96% have failed to achieve what they wanted to on a mobile device, and as a result of this, 91% have simply gone to a competitor's website instead. However, if we get the experience right, we see exactly what happens. 80% say that they have recommended a brand based on the mobile website. And even more importantly, 29% say that they do this often or very often. So I think in terms of content marketing, the conclusion is clear. Strategic distribution of content is what will set businesses apart in this hyper-competitive landscape. Optimizing for search and mobile, building those relationships with branded publications, and reaching out to influencers in your field, just a few of those ways to make sure that your content reaches your target market. If you get that content marketing strategy piece right, your audience will engage with the content, it will be shared, your site will be recommended, and the result is that the web traffic will go up. So, in summary, the three key points then: the combination of mobile and more generally multi-screen and social is what's really driving this content marketing piece. The trends are changing, and as a result of this, it's changing how we're interpreting that marketing funnel. So the key piece here is measuring the success of customer engagement and user experience will become the foundation for optimizing future customer experiences. Well, that concludes the main section of the webinar, so thank you for joining us, and we'll just take a moment now to collate any questions as they come in. So there's just a couple of questions. First up, how should budget for content marketing development be split between the creative and user experience? So I think that's a really good question. In fact, obviously, it doesn't matter if you create the best video in the world if the audience can't engage with it. So if that user experience piece doesn't also slot into place, then all of that creative energy, all of the resource there is lost. I think also when we consider that in light of the multi-screen fanatic world, getting that user experience right across multiple devices is absolutely key. So this drives back towards what I was mentioning around being able to actually measure what's taking place, what's right for your audience, and then optimize around your specific audience is what's key. And that will be able to that will help you be able to decide what the split should actually look like in terms of the creative and the user experience piece. Another question is it more important to create content consistently or content that engages but less frequently? So that's another really great question. I think the key here again is really sits in that the measuring piece, so the actual analysis of how people are engaging with content, both at the start of their sort of thinking about the user journey, also during the user journey, and then what happens as a result after that. So I think in terms of that, once you're sort of evaluating that user engagement piece with your content, it'll help strike the right balance between how frequently should you be sending out content and is your content actually working effectively. Okay, so at this time, there's no further questions, so thank you for joining us today. We'll be running a series of webinars on the BrightTalk platform throughout the rest of 2015, in which we'll look at some of these trends as they continue to evolve throughout the year. So this will include more detailed look at aspects such as personalization, things like demonstrating ROI with analytics, as well as subjects such as hyperlocation, as well as, of course, a summary of all the events taking place in the mobile market that will help shape the future of marketing. So feel free to reach out to us directly with any comments or questions. If there's anything you'd like to ask us, also tweet us at Netbiscuits. So that concludes today's webinar. Thanks again, and I look forward to all of the follow-up discussions. Thank you very much, everyone.